It was February 14, 1969, a day of love, roses, and candy for most of America. But inside a federal prison hospital in Springfield, Missouri, the man who had once terrified New York City took his last breath. His name was Vito Genovese, and he died just another inmate, wearing a prison uniform instead of the custom silk suits he once favored. The heart attack that killed him at age 71 was sudden, but the journey that brought him to that cold prison bed was anything but. This is the real story of the most ruthless Don you've probably never fully understood. Vito Genovese arrived in New York Harbor in 1913 as a 15-year-old boy from a tiny village near Naples called Risigliano. He carried nothing but the clothes on his back and a fifth-grade education. His family settled in Manhattan's Little Italy, where young Vito quickly learned that the streets offered faster money than any factory job. He started small, stealing from pushcart vendors, running errands for neighborhood gangsters, collecting pennies from poor immigrants who played the illegal lottery. By 19, he had already spent a year in prison for carrying a gun without a permit. It was just the beginning. The 1920s changed everything. Prohibition turned ordinary criminals into businessmen, and Genovese found himself standing alongside some of the most ambitious young gangsters in America. He befriended a sharp-dressed street kid named Charlie Luciano, and together they went to work for a gambler named Arnold Rothstein, the man who had fixed the 1919 World Series. Rothstein taught them that bootlegging wasn't just about muscle, it was about organization, supply chains, and treating crime like a corporation. Genovese proved to be an excellent student.
By 1930, the New York underworld had split into two warring factions. On one side stood Giuseppe Masseria, an old-school boss who believed in tradition and brute force. On the other stood Salvatore Maranzano, a slick operator from Castellammare del Golfo, who thought the future belonged to smarter men. The Castellammare War dragged on for over a year, with bodies piling up in the streets. Genovese and Luciano fought for Masseria, but they had already decided the old ways were dying. On April 15, 1931, they lured Masseria to a Coney Island restaurant called Nuova Villa Tamaro. They ate dinner together, played cards, and then Luciano excused himself to the bathroom. The moment he left, Genovese and three other gunmen walked in and filled Masseria with bullets. It was over in seconds. Maranzano declared himself the boss of all bosses, but his victory lasted exactly 5 months. Genovese and Luciano knew he would eventually turn on them, so they struck first. On September 10th, they sent 4 Jewish gangsters, faces unknown to Maranzano's people, into his office disguised as government agents. The hitmen stabbed and shot him before his bodyguards could react. With both rivals dead, Luciano created the Commission, a governing body for the 5 families, and installed himself as the most powerful man in organized crime. Genovese became his underboss, second only to his childhood friend. But Genovese had a problem. In 1934, he and a man named Ferdinand Boccia had cheated a wealthy gambler out of $150,000 during a rigged card game. When Boccia demanded his share, Genovese decided the easiest solution was murder. On September 19th, Boccia walked into a Brooklyn coffee shop and never walked out, shot dead by Genovese and 5 accomplices. The murder attracted attention, and by 1936, prosecutor Thomas Dewey was building a case. Luciano had just been sentenced to 30 years for prostitution, and Genovese knew he was next. He packed $750,000 in cash, sailed for Italy, and disappeared. Italy in 1937 suited him perfectly. He settled in Nola, near Naples, and lived like a king. But Genovese never did anything halfway. He befriended Galeazzo Ciano, Mussolini's son-in-law, and allegedly supplied him with cocaine. He donated nearly $4 million to the fascist party and personally funded a new party headquarters in his adopted town.
Mussolini's government rewarded him with the Order of Saints Maurice and Lazarus, one of Italy's highest honors, and made him a commendatore. The street thief from Little Italy now dined with fascist royalty. When American forces invaded Italy in 1943, Genovese simply switched sides. He offered his services as an interpreter and liaison to the Allied military government, charming his way into a position of trust. He drove around Naples in a staff car, helping American officers navigate the chaos of occupied Italy. What they didn't know was that Genovese had built one of the largest black market operations in southern Europe, stealing army supplies and selling them back at enormous profits. He became so powerful that he reportedly arranged the murder of Carlo Tresca, an anti-fascist newspaper editor in New York, as a favor to his former Italian friends. His luck ran out in 1944. An army investigator named Orange Dickey had been a New York cop before the war, and he recognized Genovese from wanted posters. Suddenly, the charming interpreter found himself in military custody, facing extradition back to the United States for murder. But Genovese had always believed in insurance. The key witness against him, a man named Peter Latempa, was being held in protective custody in Brooklyn. On January 15, 1945, Latempa swallowed 2 pills prescribed for a gallbladder condition and died within hours. Police called it an accidental overdose from poisoned medication. Without a witness, the case collapsed. Genovese walked free in June 1946. He returned to New York determined to reclaim what he had lost. But the world had changed. Luciano had been deported to Italy. Frank Costello now ran the family, and he preferred negotiation to violence. Genovese smiled and waited, but he never forgot. Throughout the early 1950s, he rebuilt his power base, investing in narcotics despite warnings from older gangsters who thought heroin was too hot to handle. His wife Anna filed for separation in 1953 and testified in open court that he earned $30,000 weekly from the Italian lottery alone. The tabloids had a field day, and Genovese found himself exposed in ways he had never been before. By 1957, he decided to move. In May, a gunshot wounded Costello outside his apartment building. The bullet only grazed his scalp, but Costello got the message and retired. In October, Albert Anastasia was shot dead in a barber shop at the Park Sheraton Hotel while getting a shave. With both rivals eliminated, Genovese finally controlled the family that would soon bear his name. He was the boss of bosses, the most powerful mafia don in America. Power made him careless. In November 1957, he called a meeting of mob leaders from across the country at a quiet estate in Appalachian, upstate New York. A curious state trooper noticed the expensive cars parked on a dead-end road and called for backup. The raid captured over 60 gangsters, including Genovese, who claimed he had just stopped by for a barbecue. The Appalachian meeting became an international embarrassment for the Mafia and put Genovese directly in the crosshairs of federal law enforcement. In 1958, narcotics agents built a case against him, relying on testimony from small-time drug dealers desperate to avoid prison. Many experts doubted Genovese would personally handle heroin. He was too insulated, too careful, but the evidence stuck. In April 1959, he was convicted of conspiracy to violate federal narcotics laws and sentenced to 15 years. At 61 years old, Vito Genovese entered federal prison for the last time. Prison could not contain him entirely. From his cell in Atlanta, he continued to run the family through messages carried by visiting relatives and corrupt guards. He ordered murders, settled disputes, and approved business deals. But prison also brought him into close contact with a soldier named Joe Valachi, a low-level member of his own family serving time for heroin. Valachi later testified that Genovese became paranoid, convinced that someone had betrayed him. He allegedly kissed Valachi on the cheek one day and said, "You know, Joey, I think somebody close to me is causing me all this trouble." Valachi took it as a death sentence.
On June 22, 1962, Valachi spotted an inmate he believed was a hitman sent by Genovese. He picked up a length of pipe left near a construction site and beat the man to death. When federal investigators questioned him, he assumed Genovese had already ordered his murder and decided to talk. His testimony before a Senate committee in 1963 revealed the secrets of Cosa Nostra to the American public for the first time. The oath of silence, the structure of the families, the rituals and rules. Valachi's betrayal destroyed whatever remained of Genovese's reputation.
Vito Genovese spent his final years in the medical center for federal prisoners in Springfield, Missouri, his health failing and his empire slipping away. He died on February 14, 1969, Valentine's Day. The man who had ordered dozens of murders, who had befriended dictators and outsmarted prosecutors, who had clawed his way from the slums of Naples to the pinnacle of the American underworld, ended his days as prisoner number 65876N. His body was returned to New York and buried in St. John's Cemetery in Queens, where tourists still visit his grave and wonder at the life he lived. The Genovese family still operates today, one of the 5 families that dominate organized crime in New York, but the man who gave it his name rests in a quiet cemetery, a reminder that even the most powerful dons eventually meet the same end, alone, forgotten, and far from the glory they once commanded.